What is up, fight nerds and dirty gamblers? I am Erik, and this is Erik Bets Fights. And I just realized that I forgot to check my audio before I went live. Well, holy crap! We're just gonna roll with it. Hopefully my mic is hooked up. Let me see if. Hold on a second. Let me see if there's a way. I do this every time. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm ready to go, and then I'm actually not ready to go. Let me just make sure. Yo, default stead. Okay, yeah, we should be good. All right, never mind. We should be ready to roll. All right, folks. It is it's time. It's UFC 281 week, folks. Hell of a good card. Topped by, sorry, I'm getting this set up here. Topped by obviously the middleweight title fight between Israel Adesanya and Alex Pereira. Should be a lot of fun. They've got some history, having fought in kickboxing twice before. Also, of course, the co-main event, also a title fight between Carla Esparza and Weili Zhang. Should be a good one. And then, of course, Chandler and Poirier up there. And there's great fights all up and down the card. Honestly, I think it's going to be a really good time. I even told my wife, like, hey, it's a good card. We should go to Buffalo Wild Wings. Like, that's her idea of a perfect date night, right? Go watch fights with me at Buffalo Wild Wings. Probably not, but she's willing to do it anyway because she's good like that. Anyway, folks, we're going to go ahead and break down every fight on UFC 281 from a betting perspective. But first of all, let's go ahead and take a look at, we'll do a quick little recap of how my results turned out from the last event. So let's go ahead and pull that up. All right, so our last event was, what was it, UFC Vegas 64? I can't remember, 65 maybe. Marina Rodriguez versus Amanda Lemos. So here was the betting slate I had. It was a slight losing night. I lost 1.3 units, lost 17% ROI. So let's just go through those bets first, starting at the top. The very first bet I made on this card was Tagir. He was kind of my most confident spot. I got him at minus 1.75 to win 1 unit. He closed at least minus. Sorry, I don't know what's going on in my throat. He closed at least minus 220 or so. So we got some of the got some CLV in our pocket there. Excuse me. And then I did take a couple dog shots on Ludwig Sholinian. That was one of those spots where I didn't expect him to win, but I thought plus 210 was wide. So I put a unit on him there. And then I put a unit on Ramona Pascual. I really thought she was going to be able to win that fight. And I had a friend in town. Those of you who follow me on Twitter probably saw me talking about this. I had a friend in town on Saturday. He messaged me on Friday and said, hey, what are you doing tomorrow? And I was like, well, I have fights to watch, but other than that, nothing. And he was like, well, I have an opportunity to fly into Vegas tomorrow morning and then leave again Sunday morning. So he's like, I'd be there less than 24 hours. Are you busy? Should I come? And I was like, yeah, do it. So anyway, so I was hanging out with him. Like, we went to the sports book at Luxor and we're watching the fights there a little bit, but we were kind of wandering around and stuff. So I was only catching like bits and pieces of some of the fights. So I caught like the very end of the Pascual and Tamirez Vidal fight. Like, I saw Tamirez Vidal throw a knee and I saw Ramona Pascual go to the ground, but I thought that it was like a low blow, and they were, because I was only catching little bits and pieces of it. So I didn't really see what happened exactly. And then I read that it was like a knee to the liver. I'm going to have to go back and watch that and see what happened there exactly, because I still think Ramona's a better fighter than Tamirez Vidal, but she wasn't on Saturday. So lost a unit there. I did parlay up Rodriguez and Hadley. Obviously, Rodriguez was not able to pull it out there over Lemos. Maverick inside the distance. I went a full unit on that because I was pretty sure that would happen. It didn't. Bautista by sub plus 550. We picked up 1.1 units there. Minner by sub round 1. Obviously, we had a whole, I'm not going to get into that. Everybody's been talking about that ad nauseum. But the whole weird situation with Minner being injured and the line moving and everything. Anyway, so yeah, he didn't come through. Minner, Shah Yulan, Nurdanbeke under 2.5. That one came through for us. And then I did sprinkle Rodriguez in round 4 and Rodriguez in round 5, just 0.1 units each. Didn't happen for us. That's all right. I haven't been doing great lately, quite frankly. I mean, I've been pushing sideways for months, but yeah, if you look right here, I've lost the last few events. But to be fair, a couple of these two, not this last one, but the two before that were the ones when I was in Mexico and I was just tailing other people's bets. So I can pass the buck, pass the blame a little bit, right? I mean, I still chose the bets, but they weren't based on my own research. Anyway, we're having some fun. As I always say, my unit size is really small. I'm not trying to be the best MMA gambler in the world. I'm not trying to get rich at this. I mean, if I did, great. Don't get me wrong. But yeah, I just do this to have fun. It's just a hobby. So yeah, if you're looking for the very best, most rock solid MMA betting advice out there, this isn't where you're going to get it. But if you want to just have a good time and talk about fights, I can do that with you. All right, let's go ahead and break these fights down a little bit. The first fight, I always do this. I forgot to it's especially funny because I take so much time getting ready to do this video and I like double check everything and I'm like, yep, I'm ready to go and whatever. And then I'm always not ready to go. I don't have my notes here. Sorry. I did the video last week without notes because I accidentally deleted all my notes and it went okay, but I still think it's better when I do have some notes. Anyway, first fight of the night is going to be at 205. Carlos Ulberg versus Nikolai Negumereanu. Ulberg sits at 6-1. Negumereanu at 13-1. And it's nearly a coin flip fight. We're seeing Ulberg at -120, Negumereanu at +100. A lot of times these Tapology odds are a little behind, but I think that is about correct as for where they're sitting right now. We do see a pretty big height advantage. Ulberg's 6'4", Negumereanu at 6 foot. And if that's correct, anyway, it shows Negumereanu shows 1 inch of reach on him, so that's kind of unexpected. But even so, I didn't take a ton of notes on this fight because I don't really have a lot to say about it. I can see I've seen a lot of people saying like, okay, this is a great spot to bet on Ulberg. Like getting an Ulberg at almost a coin flip against Negumereanu is a just a honeypot of a betting spot. And I can understand that argument, but there, I do have concerns about Negumereanu's wrestling and grappling upside and just his toughness and grittiness and cardio, right? I mean, Ulberg is the far more athletic guy and the far more skilled fighter, but if this game was just about figuring out who is the more skilled fighter, it would be a lot easier, wouldn't it? Because that's usually pretty easy to figure out. And we all know that it isn't the most skilled fighter who wins all the time, right? If the most skilled fighter always won, handicapping MMA would be pretty easy. But there's just a whole lot of other things that come into it. We know Negumereanu has a head like a brick. He can keep coming forward. He's not very technical striking offensively or defensively, but he's not afraid to just come forward swinging to take the best that you can swing back because he knows that he's got that durability. He's also not a fantastic wrestler or grappler, but again, he has the grittiness and the cardio to go for it. He will shoot takedowns. He will work on the ground. Ulberg's last fight, a lot of people, even a lot of very sharp people, were betting on Tefan Nchukwi, thinking like, hey, this is a good spot for him. Well, Ulberg came out and got Nchukwi out of there very quickly. It's not that it's not that he can't do that to Nikolai Negumereanu. Even though with everything I just said, Negumereanu is very tough. He's very hard to hurt. He's very hard to put out. But we do see, those things don't always hold up. I mean, how many times in the past have we said, oh, this guy has never been knocked out before? Well, every fighter at one point in time has never been knocked out, right? There's always a first time. Just because Nikolai Negumereanu has never been knocked out doesn't mean Carlos Ulberg can't come out here and put his lights out in a minute. He could. I don't think that's terribly likely. But so, obviously Ulberg's going to be the better striker. Negumereanu is probably going to look to push the grappling at some point. Ulberg's not a fantastic grappler, but we did see him grapple in the, was it the Fabio Charant fight? I think we did see him do some wrestling and grappling, and he didn't look terrible. He was able to hold his own there. So yeah, overall, I'm staying away from this one. I just don't feel a strong read here. I feel like this is a spot where I'm going to learn a little bit more about Carlos Ulberg. Like, can he stop the takedowns here? If he gets taken down, can he get up? Can Negumereanu handle Ulberg's striking prowess and his power? I've seen people, like I said, feeling confident in this fight. And I just don't. So it's going to be a stay away from me, but it should be a fun fight to open up the card with anyway. So can't feel too bad about that. Next up, we've got, I'm going to take a little drink here, but next up, we've got Julio Arce versus Montel Jackson. I'll tell you guys a funny thing. I just took a drink right there. I've talked to other people who've said the same thing too. Like when I first started making YouTube videos, I was so anal about every little thing. I would go back and edit out every instance where I was taking a drink. If I had like too long of a break where I didn't say anything, or if I was like looking at notes or something, I would go through and edit all that stuff out. And eventually I realized, like, man, none of that stuff matters. Just make the video and put it out. Anyway, Julio Arce versus Montel Jackson taking place at bantamweight. We see Montel Jackson at minus 205, Julio Arce at plus 175. I do have fightodds.io pulled up here. I think that's pretty accurate. So yeah, here we see Arce plus 205, Montel Jackson minus 200. Okay. Yeah, right around there. So Montel Jackson, pretty big favorite here. If we look at the tail of the tape, we do see Montel Jackson's got 3 inches of height and 5.5 inches of reach here. So pretty considerable. I do have some stats in my notes here that I want to share with you on this one. So Arce has a pretty high striking volume. He throws more than 12 significant strikes per minute, but he lands only 37% of the time. So a fairly low striking offense percentage there. Arce has been taken down only once on 18 attempts in the UFC. So that's something to keep in mind here. That's very impressive. If you count Contender Series, Arce is 6-3 at the UFC level. And also counting Contender Series, Montel Jackson is 6-2 at the UFC level. Julio Arce, he's a solid boxer with good, solid technical, fundamental boxing skills. He tends to start kind of slow in round 1 and pick up his activity later in the fight. Jackson is, he was a high-level wrestler at one point. He even had dreams to go to the Olympics. And according to what I read on Wikipedia, he had to give up his Olympic dream to take care of sick grandparents or something like that. And, who knows? That was on Wikipedia. I don't know anything about it. I don't even know if it's true, but that's what it said. So I went ahead and put it in my notes. Montel Jackson is currently 11-2 as a pro, but he also went 8-1 as an amateur. So overall, he has an overall MMA record of 19-3, which is, pretty impressive. One thing to bear in mind about Jackson, like I said, he was a high level wrestler. He still has that aspect to his game. Of course, he averages more than 4 takedowns per 15 minutes, and he completes 78% of his takedown attempts. So the guy is wrestling very efficiently in MMA. Sometimes we see high level wrestlers who are unable to transition those wrestling skills to the MMA cage, and Montel Jackson has been able to transition his skills pretty effectively. Also, so Montel Jackson's 2 losses in the UFC were to Brett Johns and Ricky Simone. Brett Johns landed 8 takedowns on Jackson. Ricky Simone landed 7. So if we look at that, we see a pretty clear pattern that Jackson beats fighters as long as he can out wrestle them, and he loses to fighters if he can't. That's what we've seen so far. Again, like I said with Ulberg and Negumereanu, just because we see these trends doesn't mean they're always going to hold true. But so far it has held true that the only fighters that Montel Jackson can't beat are fighters who are able to out wrestle him in the cage. And, we're not likely going to see Arce do that. So I do like Montel Jackson here. I don't like the minus 200 price tag. I'm going to stay away from that personally. But I do like Montel Jackson to get the win, probably by decision. Next fight on the card, and I'm always honest with you and let you know when there's a card or a fight that I'm just not particularly interested in or don't have a strong read on, and this is that one for me. Mike Trizano, Seungwoo Choi. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to be a boring fight or anything. It's just, these 2 guys aren't guys that are like super on my radar, and I just don't have a ton of interest in this fight. So they can come out here and impress me and change my mind, but that's how I feel about them at the moment anyway. But Mike Trizano is currently 9-3. He's a plus 135 underdog. Seungwoo Choi, 10-5. He's a minus 155 favorite. Not much difference in the size between these 2 guys. Seungwoo Choi is 1 inch taller. He does have a 3.5 inch reach advantage. I'm going to check the fight odds, make sure that that's about right. Yeah, Seungwoo Choi, minus 158. Mike Trizano, plus 142. All right, so yeah, it's a reasonably close fight. I felt, after doing the tape, I felt like this fight was a coin flip. I'm not going to say a ton about it, but I did type up some stats that I'll share with you here. If you count his tough fights, Mike Trizano is 5-3 at the UFC level. Seungwoo Choi is 3-4 in the UFC. Trizano is he's a good striker, but he just doesn't do enough for me. He doesn't put out a lot of volume, and he doesn't really show any urgency to make something happen, even when his opponent is pulling ahead of him. And that's something I hate to see in a fighter. There's almost nothing that frustrates me more in a fighter than for them to step in there, lose the first round because they're not putting out any volume, lose the second round because they're not putting out any volume. And then in the third round, you're like, well, clearly they're going to put out some volume. They're going to shoot a takedown. What they're doing so far is not working. So they're going to go out there and change it up. And then they just don't. There are instances where we have seen Trizano crank it up a little bit in the third round, but just generally speaking, that's a trait that I hate in fighters, is when they just stay even keel and they don't show any urgency to change anything, even though it's clear that they're losing. It's just like, well, what are you doing? And I'm just an armchair guy here. I understand I'm a fat, out of shape guy. I know that people get tired and it's easier said than done to crank it up and to change what you're doing. But it's like, when you're a professional fighter and you're in there in front of millions of people and it's your job on the line. And I just don't understand how you don't just go for broke when it's clear that you're losing. But anyway, yeah, he'll put a jab out there. He'll put a leg kick out there. If his opponent gives him a slow pace, he'll just kind of accept that slow pace and roll with it. And I don't like that. Like against Hakeem Dawodu, we kind of saw him do that. He did. I think in that fight was one where he did crank it up a little bit in round 3. But my read before that fight was basically that I did bet Hakeem Dawodu in that fight, if I remember correctly. My read before that fight was Dawodu is, the better technical striker, but also he's just going to put more volume. He's just going to pick him apart, and Trizano's just going to hang out and let it happen. And largely that's what he ended up doing. And he struggles to kind of put that respect or fear in his opponent that keeps them from confidently asserting their game plan. He struggles to land that big shot that gets in somebody's head and kind of changes what they're doing. Seung-Woo Choi, honestly, I have a lot of the same things to say about him. He's kind of also sort of a slow-paced striker who doesn't necessarily show a lot of urgency a lot of the time. Yeah, I'm trying to look at my notes here and see what else. Never mind. Like I said, I don't have a lot to say about this fight, so now I'm like, I should say more about it. But if I don't have much to say, I'm just going to leave it at that. No interest in betting anything in this fight. No interest in this fight, period, to be honest. So I'm just going to move on to the next one. Next up, we've got Karolina Kowalkiewicz versus Silvana Gomez-Juarez. This fight is taking place at strawweight. One thing that interests me about this fight right off the bat is there's a lot of talk about Karolina Kowalkiewicz being old, right? And I know there's a difference between the years, on your birth certificate or whatever you want to say, and then the years in the cage. Fight years they take a lot out of the body. But what we haven't been hearing about is the age of Silvana Gomez-Juarez, and guess what? Silvana Gomez-Juarez is older than Karolina Kowalkiewicz by almost a year. They're both 37. Karolina's barely 37, and Silvana Gomez-Juarez will turn 38 next month. So she's got some miles on her as well, though not as many fight miles. Although I guess really Karolina Kowalkiewicz only has 20 professional fights and Gomez-Juarez has 15, so not that different. Kowalkiewicz has been at the higher level longer, more experience at the UFC level, of course. But anyway, this fight is pretty much a coin flip. They're basically the same size, both 5'3". Kowalkiewicz does show a 1 inch height advantage. 1 inch reach advantage, but I don't think that's going to make a big difference here necessarily. And yeah, looking at fight odds, it's about the same. The fight sits at about a coin flip, which feels about right to me. Kowalkiewicz, she's 5-7 in the UFC. Her last time out, she won a fight against Felice Herrig. Before that, she had dropped 5 in a row, I think, which, if I'm not mistaken, is a women's record for the UFC. Obviously, there are fighters who've dropped more than 5 in a row. BJ Penn dropped 7 or 8 UFC fights in a row. But I think for women, I spent quite a bit of time looking this up, not this week, but like last time before she fought Felice Herrig, I was looking up and trying to, because besides MMA, my big thing is trivia. So I love figuring that kind of stuff out. And I'm like, man, I don't think there's another woman who's ever lost 5 fights in a row in the UFC. If you know of any, let me know down in the comments there. But anyway, She snapped a 5-fight losing streak with a submission over Felice Herrig her last time out. And I thought she looked pretty good. Karolina Kowalkiewicz has always been a solid fighter, but she's never anyone who's really impressed me. She doesn't blow my hair back, so to speak, but I thought she looked pretty good in that fight. And she got her first ever, it was definitely her first submission at the UFC level. Was it her first submission in MMA total? I think it might have been, but I can't remember for sure. We saw in Silvana Gomez-Juarez's UFC debut versus Lupi Godinez that there is a path to victory over her in the wrestling and grappling. So could that be a potential path to victory for Karolina Kowalkiewicz? I mean, maybe. We did see her use the wrestling and grappling in her fight with Felice Herrig. Obviously, she is nowhere near the wrestler that Lupi is. I mean, Lupi is an excellent takedown artist. I'm not saying that Kowalkiewicz is going to be able to do what Silvana Gomez-Juarez Kowalkiewicz probably isn't going to be able to do to her what Lupi did to her, but I'm just saying, generally speaking, that could be a path to victory here. Silvana Gomez-Juarez is very dangerous on the feet, which is usually where Karolina looks to fight. But this is not a spot where she's probably going to want to do that. When you're a 115-pound woman, you don't usually have to worry too much about being KO'd clean in the cage, right? Silvana Gomez-Juarez is a 115-pound woman who can put your lights out. So that's something that Kowalkiewicz really needs to be aware of here. She is a kickboxer, but she's a pitter patter kickboxer. She's not somebody who's gonna knock your lights out. She's gonna use her movement and use her technique to touch you up with punches and kicks, and she does that well. But the longer you hang out on the feet with Silvana Gomez-Juarez, the more danger you're putting yourself in to be KO'd. So I would think that the smart thing to do would be for Kowalkiewicz to use her grappling here. I'm just saying, I don't know that we can trust her to do that. I also don't know that she has the level of wrestling to have a ton of success going that route here. So that's, so I see why the fight is a coin flip. It makes sense to me. I do lean Silvana Gomez-Juarez slightly here. I like her to potentially find the knockout, but it's not a fight that I feel, really, really strongly about as far as my read or my pick. So I'll be staying away from that one from a betting perspective. Trying to remember. Well, we'll look at my bets when we get to the end. I'm trying to remember if I put a sprinkle on Silvana Gomez-Juarez by KO. I might have. We'll check. That's how my dumb short-term memory works. So it's always fun for me to go back and look at my bets too. Like, I was thinking about betting this. Did I or not? I can't remember. So we'll find out. Next up, we've got Otman Azaitar versus Matt Frevola. Matt Frevola's got that dope apology picture where he looks like Indiana Jones or something. Otman Azaitar with an undefeated record of 13-0. Matt Frevola sitting at 9-3-1. Nearly a coin flip fight here again. Frevola shows 1 inch of height and their reach is the same. So no real size advantage either way here. And yeah, it looks about the same on fightodds.io. Azaitar -117. Matt Frevola can be had for +105. So Azaitar, he's undefeated, 13 wins. 12 of those came by finish, and 7 of those were first round KOs. So the guy has won 13 fights. 7 of them were knockouts in the first round. However, one thing that, at least at the UFC level, one thing that we don't know much about is Azaitar's takedown defense. We really just haven't seen that tested. And, Frevola is almost certainly going to look to test that here. Frevola is 9-3-1 as a pro. And before that, he had 8 straight wins as an amateur. So he's actually so that puts him at 17-3-1 overall. Not a bad record. In Frevola's last fight against Genaro Valdez, crazy fight. If you don't remember what happened in that fight, go back and watch it. I'm not going to recount the whole thing for you, but it was a crazy first round where both guys were just absolutely going for broke, and it was insane. With the exception of that fight, Matt Frevola has taken down every opponent he has beaten, and he has lost every fight in which he was not able to get takedowns. Excuse me. This is at the UFC level, of course. Let me say that again. He has taken down every opponent he has beaten has been somebody he's been able to take down. Every time he has lost, it was when he wasn't able to get takedowns. So hopefully he's aware of that stat too and is like, hey, I should really look for takedowns here. what worries me here for Frevola is his last fight with Genaro Valdez. He went in there, he got crazy in round 1, and he was able to find the knockout. And I'm hoping that's not in his head, that he's like, hey, that worked out for me, I'm going to do that again. Going in there with Atman Azaitar and having a crazy slobber knocker where you're both swinging wild hooks, that is not the way for Matt Frevola to win this fight. And I'm hoping that he comes in here and exercises good fight IQ instead of just coming in here looking to have some fun and try to repeat the success that he had in his last fight, because that's what Azaitar does, is knock you out cold in round 1. So the fight is pretty close to even, which makes a lot of sense to me. We have seen Frevola knocked out in round 1 before. Terrence McKinney was able to knock him out in round 1. So yeah, Azaitar is definitely live to find that round 1 KO. But like I said, we don't know much about Azaitar's takedown defense, and Frevola is someone who will test his takedown defense. So it's difficult to be confident in this fight. I did put a little sprinkle on Atman Azaitar to find that round 1 KO, but I see this as as far as betting it pre-flop, I see this as a potential live betting situation. There's a few fights on this card that I like for live betting. The kind of spots that you like to look at for live betting are spots where we know someone is really, really dangerous in round 1 and is likely going to have a really good round 1, but they may potentially fall off after that. Because then, of course, what you see happen, if that person has a really impressive round 1, you're going to get an even better line on their opponent going into round 2, and we will see the person who had the good round 1 start to fall off, potentially, that kind of thing. So this is a spot where I'm going to be looking at that. I did sprinkle a Azaitar round 1 KO, but as far as betting aside, betting a money line, I'm going to leave it alone and keep an eye on the live line. All right, next fight up, we've got Andre Petroski versus Wellington Turman. I was just talking about that last fight being a good live betting spot. This is another one, and for exactly the same reason. Petroski sits at 8-1, Wellington Turman at 18-5. Petroski is a pretty big favorite here at -210 with the comeback on Wellington Turman at +175. I think that's still accurate. The odds are still pretty accurate there. They are the same height at 6 feet. Andre Petroski has 1 inch of reach, but I don't think that, usually like 1 inch of reach doesn't end up being anything too significant unless you're really, really good at using your reach and using range. Stuff to do a whole lot with 1 inch. Anyway, like I said, I think this is another good live betting spot. Petroski, if you've watched Petroski fight, he's extremely physical and powerful and dangerous, but he becomes less so after round 1. Because he's a guy, he is very skilled, but because he has such strength and such physicality, a lot of times when guys are very physical and are very strong and have that as an advantage over most opponents, it's hard for them not to use it, right? I mean, of course, I don't mean use it. I mean, for them to rely on it, kind of like, you'll often hear it said in jiu-jitsu, for example. Brazilian jiu-jitsu was developed to be a system of techniques that works for someone who doesn't have a lot of strength. I mean, that's how Brazilian jiu-jitsu was designed, right? Is the idea that, okay, looking at an armbar, for example, like I'm going to use my entire body against one of your limbs. Like it's finding ways to make it so that somebody who doesn't have a lot of strength can defeat someone who does. And in learning the techniques of jiu-jitsu, I mean, the same can go for wrestling or whatever, but I think BJJ is a great example. And in learning those techniques, if you are, you go in as a white belt and you're a bodybuilder or something, and you're a super physically strong guy, you can get away with muscling techniques that other people can't. And people who don't have that physical strength, it's likely that they're going to have to learn the tiny little details, the tiny little nuances of the technique in order to make the technique work, because those nuances are there. That's how BJJ was developed. Those little nuances, the little details that make the techniques work are there. But if you have a lot of physical strength over most of the people you're rolling with, you may not need to learn or use those little details or nuances. And it's like I'm throwing shade at Petroski here, but I'm just saying he might be a guy that falls prey to that a little bit, and I don't even blame the people who do, because I don't even know if you can help it when you're super physically strong like that. But anyway, I went off on a little bit of a tangent there. But Andre Petroski, very physical, very dangerous. But here's the issue: on the feet, he throws everything with full power. He loads up on big overhands. He's a guy who's looking to get you out of there with one big strike. You know, he's not really putting together combos. He's kind of just loading up on big shots. And also the way he kind of grapples the same way, you know, he scrambles really chaotically. He's always kind of looking to beat his opponent to the next position, which he does really well. I mean, he has good top control. He floats well. He scrambles to the next position. But what I'm getting at here is these are all things that require that physicality advantage. And when you start to tire and that physicality advantage starts to go away, we'll see those things start to wane, right? What your ability to throw huge, massive hooks like you're swinging a baseball bat. Yeah, in round one, that ability is there, but it's going to slow down quite a bit in round two. Your ability to scramble well and beat your opponent to the next position and be dominant in that regard, as you tire and slow down, that ability is going to wane a little bit. So that's kind of why, like, I guess I get why Petroski is at minus 210, because he does have a lot of physical advantages here. And Turman is a guy that he's skilled, but he's a guy that's been a little bit disappointing at the UFC level so far, right? Like he's kind of a guy who, I mean, he did come through and beat Misha Serkinov in I think that was his last fight. And he was an underdog there. I'm pretty sure. I wasn't expecting him to win there. So that was an impressive performance. You know, it's not the guy, like the guy's a total scrub, but he hasn't been super impressive at the UFC level. But if Wellington Turman survives the first, let's say 4 to 7 minutes, because Petroski, you'll even see Petroski slow down at the end of round one sometimes. He does fight pretty well through exhaustion. I'm not saying he death gasses and just can't fight at all, but I'm saying you noticeably see him slow down and become less dangerous. He continues fighting. He continues trying to win the fight, but he's just not as dangerous anymore, even toward the end of round one and getting into round two. So this is, again, a spot where I like the idea of hanging back and looking for a live bet. It's very possible Petroski's going to come out here and finish Turman in round one, but if he doesn't, I think we're going to see Petroski start to slow down. I think we're going to see Turman. I mean, Turman is a very capable grappler, and he's, I would say, technique-wise, he's a better boxer than Petroski. Petroski's going to be throwing those big overhands, but then when he slows down, Turman's going to be able to probably start putting together combos on him, as Petroski just kind of waits to throw those big overhands. Turman is a very capable grappler. As Petroski slows down and gets a little weaker and isn't able to scramble to positions as quickly, I think we could see Turman start to get the upper hand there as well. So, yeah, if I was going to bet this fight pre-flop, Turman would probably be the way to go because we're getting good dog money on him there, but I'm going to stay away from this one. Keep an eye on round one and keep my finger on that live bet button. All right. Oh, I should give a pick because my homie Brian is, he tracks like 23 different YouTube people who make picks and he puts them all in a spreadsheet and tracks us. So, hit me if I'm forgetting to make picks on some of these, Brian, just shoot me a message. But, yeah, I am going to pick Petroski here, but not super confidently. All right. Next up, Erin Blanchfield versus Molly McCann. Taking place at flyweight, Erin Blanchfield, cold-blooded. She sits at 9-1 with Molly McCann at 13-4. We see Blanchfield as a huge favorite here at minus 390. Come back on Molly McCann plus 310. Actually, I think Blanchfield minus 390. Okay. Yeah, that's plus 334. Okay, yeah. Pretty huge favorite here. Erin Blanchfield, 23 years old to Molly McCann's 32. She's almost 10 years younger. They're both 5'4". Blanchfield shows a 6-inch reach advantage. I didn't notice that. That's pretty significant. I mean, she's not a great striker, but even so. Obviously, the story on Erin Blanchfield, she's known as a dominant and suffocating wrestler, right? She shows something like, doesn't she show like, hold on, let me see if I can pull this up here. Sorry, I should have been more prepared with this info. I've got these stats. Hey, if y'all haven't, I'm guessing most of y'all watching this probably already know, but if you haven't joined Uncle Wheezy's Patreon, it is well worth doing. Uncle Wheezy, for $5 a month, he puts out these stats for every single card, this whole spreadsheet of stats. And I know I rely on them. I know a lot of other cappers do too. For me, it's a no-brainer at $5 a month. He's not paying me to say this. I just think he's a good dude and I like the work that he does. So yeah, I've become like pretty reliant on Wheezy's spreadsheet of info here. But yeah, what I want to look, okay, yeah, Blanchfield shows she's hit 2/3 of her takedowns at the UFC level, and she shows 60.19% control time over her opponents. So yeah, she has proven to be very dominant in that regard so far. However, at almost minus 400, she's going to need to be able to come out here, to cover that price tag for me to feel comfortable, putting her in a parlay at that number or something. She's going to have to have a pretty sweat-free performance here, right? She's going to have to come out, take Molly McCann down. Like in order to bet someone at that number, I would want to feel quite certain that they have the upper hand everywhere and that there's just really not a way that they can lose this fight. And I don't feel that way here. Molly McCann hits very hard. Again, we're talking about 125-pound women here. I was just talking about how you don't see a lot of women who have KO power at the lower weight classes in the women's divisions, and Molly McCann does. She's a bit of a monster in that regard. She can hit very hard. She's very aggressive. She has a variety of striking techniques that she can use with great aplomb and with great power. And Erin Blanchfield, she's not a fish out of water on the feet, but she can be pretty hittable, and her striking doesn't look great. It is absolutely a possibility that Molly McCann knocks out Erin Blanchfield here. It's enough of a possibility that I don't like the idea of parlaying Blanchfield at almost minus 400. Because if Blanchfield, they're going to spend some time striking in this fight most likely, and depending upon how long Blanchfield waits to look for a takedown, or if she's not able to get takedowns easily and they do spend time on the feet, that time is going to favor Molly McCann pretty heavily, I think. One stat I wanted to share here: in her 3 UFC losses, Molly was taken down a total of 14 times. In her 6 UFC wins, she was taken down a total of once. So that's a pretty, that shows a pretty clear pattern that if you're able to take Molly McCann down regularly, you're probably going to beat her. So it makes sense that the line is where it is in that regard. And Blanchfield, I guess I already said, at the UFC level, Blanchfield has landed 2/3 of her takedown attempts, and she's averaged just shy of 4 takedowns per 15 minutes. So again, looking, in both the tape and the stats, it makes sense that Blanchfield is the favorite here. Just generally speaking, as a MMA handicapper, I usually find that it makes sense. I'm generalizing quite a bit here, but more often than not, it makes sense to favor the person who has the wrestling upside in a fight, right? Especially if it's close. If it's this one's not close, but if it's close, more often than not, I'm going to favor the person who has the wrestling upside because it gives them the ability, theoretically, to dictate where the fight takes place. And obviously, fight IQ has a lot to do with that. There's a whole lot that goes into it, but having the ability to dictate where the fight takes place is huge and can often be the thing that sways me one way or another. So yeah, this is another one that I would stay away from. Oh, I did actually end up sprinkling a prop on this one. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'm gonna wait until we look at all the bets at the end. But will Erin Blanchfield win here? Will Erin Blanchfield get takedowns and ride out top control time and find probably a decision? If not, maybe a ground and pound finish, but probably not. But yeah, she probably will. Blanchfield probably will win. But I don't like that price tag, and I personally am going to stay away from it. Next up, we've got, and yes, Brian, Blanchfield will be my. I want to make sure I'm clearly stating my picks. Blanchfield will be my pick there. Maybe I'll try to go through at the end and give my picks. I know a lot of podcasts do that. If y'all listen to the shout out to the Protect Your Neck podcast with Dan Tom. If y'all don't listen to Dan Tom, you should. He's one of, not only does he have the ASMR voice, he has the dulcet tones that you can listen to, but he's a very knowledgeable martial artist, does great breakdowns. He's also currently in camp training to take an amateur fight at age 37. He's lost like 30 pounds training. Sorry, I'm seeming like a fanboy here. I kind of kind of am a fanboy though. But yeah, it just reminds me of at the end of the Protecting the Neck podcast, Dan always says, taking Aaron Blanchfield, taking. Anyway, next up, we've got in the 205-pound division, a couple of big boys in Dominic Reyes and Ryan Spann. Dominic Reyes, the Devastator, he sits at 12-3. Ryan Spann at 20-7. We're seeing Reyes as a pretty decent sized favorite at -225 with the comeback on Ryan Spann +190. These guys are both 205ers, very big 205ers. Dominic Reyes at 6'4", Ryan Spann at 6'5". Reyes with a 77-inch reach, and Spann with a 4.5-inch reach advantage at 81.5 inches. So yeah, a couple of real big dudes at 205. If you count Contender Series, Spann is 7-2 in the UFC, which I must say is better than I expected. I don't know if this happens to you guys. It happens to me a lot. For some reason, and a lot of times I don't even really know why it happens, but there's a fighter that in my head, I will just, there's probably a reason that I first put them there, but usually I don't know what that reason is necessarily, but I'll just decide that they're not very good. And then despite anything that they show me to the contrary, my brain just holds on to that for some reason. And Ryan Spann is one of those guys that whenever I see him pop up, I'm just like, oh yeah, Ryan Spann, guy's kind of a scrub. He's not very good. So when I was doing the research for this fight and I saw that Spann is 7-2 in the UFC, I was like, oh, that's a lot better than I thought. Like, I should probably stop having this idea in my head that Ryan Spann is not very good. He has won 7 fights at the UFC level and lost only 2. So he's clearly not as much of a scrub as my brain thinks he is. In fact, Dominic Reyes, who's considered one of the best at 205, is 6-3 in the UFC. Obviously, the record doesn't tell the whole story. Dominic Reyes has been fighting much higher level competition than Ryan Spann. But even so, Reyes kicked off his UFC run with 6 straight wins, and he's now dropped 3 in a row. But if we look here, the 3 in a row that he's dropped were against Jiří Procházka, Jan Blachowicz, John Jones. So yeah, I mean, literally the best 205ers in the world. So that's okay. Reyes is a guy who's, he's accustomed to having a size advantage in his fights, and that's not going to be, did I say 3.5? 4.5? Yeah. Spann is 4.5 inches, but yeah, so he's at a disadvantage in the size here, which is something that he's not accustomed to. I'm not going to say a ton more about this fight. Like for me, what it comes down to, I think the fight could play out closely at times, but when it comes right down to it, I just think Reyes is going to be the sniper here. I just think he's going to land the harder, cleaner shots on the counter. Even if it is playing out closely on the feet, I just think Reyes is the smoother, slicker striker who's just going to land the better, cleaner shots. And that's really about all I have to say about this fight. So yeah, I do like Reyes to get the win here. I just want to make sure that those odds are still pretty close to accurate. I think they are. -205 +185. Okay, dropped a little bit. But yeah, I don't love the number, and I am, I guess I wouldn't blame you for parlaying Reyes, I guess, at that number. I'm probably not going to. I do think Reyes is the better fighter, and probably by a pretty decent margin. But the reason that I would be a little bit nervous about parlaying that -220, -200, around there is just because Ryan Spann is such a big, dangerous guy, when with 2 big, powerful guys like this, all it takes is one slip up for the fight to potentially be over. I mean, look at what Jiří did to Dominic Reyes. I'm not saying Ryan Spann's going to do the same thing, but all it takes is one moment like that when you're dealing with a couple of big, powerful guys like this. So personally, I am going to stay off it, but I do like Reyes to, probably a decision here. Well, you know what? I think he probably does find a finish. Let's say he finds a KO in round 2 or 3. Let's go with that. And next up, we've got Renato Moicano versus Brad Riddell in the lightweight division. Renato Moicano 16-5-1, Brad Riddell at 10-3. This one's another one that's pretty close to a coin flip. Moicano showing at -125, Riddell at +105. I think that's about where it's still at. Moicano at 5'11", Riddell 5'7", so we do see a height advantage there. However, Moicano shows 72 inches of reach, Riddell 71.3, oddly specific. So less than an inch of reach advantage, 4 inches height advantage here. I was there live for Moicano's last fight, that absolute barn burner against Rafael dos Anjos. That was a super fun fight, and I think that that fight kind of encapsulates who Renato Moicano is as a fighter, right? Very, very skilled, but besides being very skilled, super gritty, super tough, super determined. He's not going anywhere. I mean, that fight could have been stopped by the ref. There were 4 or 5 different times where that fight could have been stopped by the ref. There were also 4 or 5 different times probably where it looked like Moicano was done for, not just from the damage, but also just, well, I guess it would be because of the damage too, but the damage and just like cardio together, like it just looked like he was beat up, tired, didn't have much left. I mean, he found not only a second win, but a third, fourth, fifth win in that fight. He would go from looking almost done for to all of a sudden having a big moment in the fight, like for 25 minutes. And he even took that fight on like 3 or 4 weeks notice, I think. So, I mean, he's just, that fight kind of spells out who Moicano is. Just a tough, gritty dude with high level skills and the ability to, make those skills work for him even over a very tough and grueling 25 minutes. Moicano, he likes to come out aggressive early. He likes to throw body kicks, 1s and 2s, hooks and uppercuts. He mixes it up pretty well with the striking. He's also a slick grappler. He has 9 rear naked choke finishes on his record, which is important because looking at his record again, 16-5-1, he has only 16. He has 16 wins total. 9 of those are by rear naked choke. So the dude is locking in a rear naked choke in over half of his wins. That pretty impressive. Brad Riddell is a guy who's, he's known more so as a striker. He definitely does have wrestling and grappling as well, but he's known as a high level kickboxer. He throws everything with authority. He hits hard. He's one of those guys who's kind of picking his opportunities to land big counters rather than really like chipping away with consistent volume, right? Like we see some fighters, I always call it the Diaz style. We see some fighters that are just constantly putting volume out there, just trying to touch you with the jab, touch you with the jab, touch you with the cross, just keep touching you up. And we see other guys who are more so looking to feint, draw something out of you so they can counter with something big. That's more Riddell. He's trying to either create shots from you so he can counter, or like look for those moments where he can land something big. I also think he's quicker, and I think overall more athletic than Moicano, and he seems to slow down less as the fight progresses. Because like I said, with Moicano in the Rafael dos Anjos fight, he fought hard for 25 minutes, but I mean, he did look, significantly slowed down. I mean, he looked like he was fighting in molasses some of the time there, and I'm not trying to talk shit because obviously the guy is tough as nails and it was a great performance, but he does slow down and get to a point where he's still going hard, but he just doesn't have much speed or snap to him anymore. And I think Riddell falls off a little bit less in that way. So obviously on paper, Brad Riddell is the better striker. Moicano is the better grappler. But how sometimes it comes down to how big are those edges. I think that because Moicano has the size that he has here, and because he does mix up his strikes well, he is gritty and tough. Like, I think that it could play out somewhat closely on the feet. I think Riddell will probably be the one landing the bigger, harder, more impactful blows, but I don't think he's necessarily going to run away with it on the feet. And on the ground, I do think Moicano, I think his grappling advantage is probably larger than Riddell's striking advantage, I guess is what I'm saying. And also in the stand-up, just Moicano's grittiness, his aggressiveness, his output. Like I said, Riddell will kind of circle on the outside sometimes and look to land counters, whereas Moicano looks to kind of stalk forward. He looks to take the fight to you, which can look good to the judges, right? So overall, I do like Moicano here. I get why the fight is close. Moicano's a slight favorite. I pretty much agree with that. And I did bet Moicano here. It's not a super, super confident pick. Like I said, I do think the line is about right. It wasn't one of those spots where I felt like I was getting a ton of value, but I also felt like Moicano could potentially be, I felt like Moicano could be a little bit of a bigger favorite, but just because of, like I said, more often than not, when I see the person who has the wrestling and grappling upside, that's what I go with. And I think Moicano has enough, even though Riddell is the better striker, I think Moicano has enough to keep it close on the feet and to make it look good in the judge's eyes on the feet. And I think he has probably a pretty significant advantage on the mat. So I was comfortable betting him here. I think I got him at either minus 120 or minus 125. So my pick is going to be Renato Moicano. Let's say by decision. But, like I said, homie has won by rear naked choke 9 times. Maybe he could get to the back and find that choke here. Wouldn't shock me. Next fight up, we've got Dan Hooker versus Claudio Puelles. I never know if I'm saying Claudio's name correctly, but that's how I'm going to say it. Excuse me 1 second. And this fight is taking place. This fight's at lightweight, right? I forgot to write that. Yeah, I think so. Because, yeah, okay, it is. Because, Hooker dropped to 145 for his last fight, and it didn't go particularly well for him. And I think he's back to 155 here. So Dan Hooker, obviously, been around the UFC a long time. Tough guy. He's won some, he's lost some, but he's definitely has been a significant fighter in this weight class. Sitting at 21-12. Claudio Puelles, the Prince of Peru, at 12-2. Shows Dan Hooker at minus 160 here. Yeah, actually, I think that's pretty close to where he's still at. Minus 140 even. Puelles plus 136. Dan Hooker, 6 foot. Claudio Puelles, 5'10". So Hooker's got 2 inches of height. We also see Hooker's reach at 75.5, 72 for Puelles. So we're seeing a 3.5 inch reach advantage over there. So like I said, Dan Hooker dropped to 145 for, I think that was his last fight, right? Yeah, against Arnold Allen. I did bet Hooker there. Obviously, that didn't go my way. Arnold Allen was able to find the round 1 KO, if I remember correctly. And I've seen a lot of talk of Hooker being shot, of Hooker's chin being gone and stuff like that. And, I rewatched the Arnold Allen fight to as part of my tape study for this. And I didn't find that to be the case. I didn't think Dan Hooker looked bad in that fight. I mean, he lost. He was not the better fighter that night. But to me, it wasn't one of those performances where it was like, oh yeah, this guy's shot and he's done for, and it was a terrible performance. I think he got bested. I mean, Dan Hooker's never been a very fast, athletic kind of guy. He's always been a little bit slow, a little bit, he looked, going down a weight class, he was at even more of a speed disadvantage there. And he just couldn't keep up. And but I didn't think it was a terrible performance. I didn't take that away from it. And I know a lot of people seem like they did and are kind of writing Dan Hooker off based on that performance. And I'm not willing to do that. So, but and also he was cutting to 145. He's back up to 155 here. Another thing that, if on paper you look at, like, okay, Hooker has lost 4 of his last 5, but again, let's see who he lost to. Arnold Allen, 17-1. Islam Makhachev, 20-1. Michael Chandler, 21-5. Dustin Poirier, 25-6. He's lost 4 of his last 5, but it's to like the best lightweights in the world, and Arnold Allen, one of the best featherweights in the world. So it's one of those things where, like, I think we can give the guy a pass for dropping 4 out of 5 to those fighters, right? First thing that stands out to me about Claudio Puelles is he's got 3 knee bar wins in the UFC and another on Tough. So if you count Tough, he's got 4 knee bar wins at the UFC level, which is almost certainly, I didn't look this up, but almost certainly a UFC record. I can't think of anybody else who has 3 knee bar wins. I think there's only been like right around 20 knee bar finishes in UFC history, if I remember correctly, maybe even less than that. I think there's only been around 20. And Claudio Puelles has 3 of them and hasn't even been in the UFC that long. So he could very well find more. And also the greatest part, he claims he doesn't even train the knee bar. He literally, he's like, yeah, I don't even train that in the room. It just, I see it and it comes up and it's there. Like that's pretty badass if it's true. But as far as a breakdown for these two, the dynamic between these two guys' skill sets, Claudio Puelles needs to get this fight to the ground to get the finish. and I'm not sure that he can. As Daniel Cormier loves to point out about Claudio Puelles, his takedowns are just not that good. How often do we see that? That's almost like a particular archetype of fighter at this point, right? Like Rodolfo Vieira would be another example, like the venomous grappler who can't get the fight to the ground. We like, oh, great. Mackenzie Dern would be another one. Yes, very dangerous submission artist, but they don't have very good takedowns. That's almost become like a meme at this point. And I don't think Claudio Puelles can take Hooker down, at least not consistently. He might be able to find one, and a lot of times what we've seen with Claudio Puelles is fighters who have lost to him by submission have sort of followed him to the ground, or have sort of they've just willingly gone to the ground with him. I don't think Dan Hooker will do that. I don't think Claudio Puelles will have much success finding the takedown on Dan Hooker, and I think Dan Hooker is going to be the much better striker and should be able to eat Claudio Puelles up. I mean, unless Hooker really has fallen off a ton, and I'm wrong about that, Hooker should be able to eat Puelles up on the feet. So I'm almost picturing this even playing out like a Ryan Hall fight, for example, how Ryan Hall will just constantly go for that Imanari roll, and it's all he's got. He's just constantly rolling for it. If we watch the why is his name escaping me now? Ryan Hall's fight with never mind, I can't come up with the name, but anyway, yeah, he'll continue to just roll for that ankle and be unable to find it. Like, I feel like we could see, not like Puelles is a total fish out of water striking. He'll do some striking here, but I feel like we're going to see Puelles just over and over again trying for, kind of piss poor half-ass takedowns that Dan Hooker is able to stop, and then Hooker's just going to follow up with strikes. So when I finished the tape on this fight, I found Hooker at minus 170-ish. And then I took a look a little bit later and found him at minus 150, I think. And I did bet him there. I thought that was a pretty good line here, considering that this fight could play out in such a way where Hooker looks like a pretty big favorite, I think. If I'm right that Puelles is not going to be able to get the takedowns and it plays out mostly on the feet, I think this fight could look really good for Dan Hooker, and minus 150 could look like a really good price. So yeah, I do like Dan Hooker here. Yeah, I guess as far as a method, I'm not sure. I'll say that maybe he finds a late finish here, but it could very well go to decision. All right, we're almost an hour in already. Just a few fights left. Next up, we've got Frankie Edgar, the legend, versus Chris Gutierrez at bantamweight. Frankie Edgar 24-10-1. Chris Gutierrez, El Guapo 18-3-2. We see Gutierrez as a decent-sized favorite here, minus 210. Frankie Edgar, plus 180. Let's check fight odds and make sure that's about right. Yep, that's about right. Sometimes Tapology is a little behind on the odds, so I like to make sure that it's accurate. The main thing that stands out here, of course, we see Frankie Edgar at 41 years old, Chris Gutierrez at 31 years old. I don't remember the exact stat, but fighters that are 10 years younger win. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of 65 to 70% of the time, I think. So they do win quite often. We see 3 inches of height on Chris Gutierrez's side, 5'9" versus 5'6". But interestingly, it shows Edgar with a 68-inch reach and Gutierrez with a 67-inch reach. I don't know if that's accurate, but according to the stats here, anyway, Gutierrez 3 inches of height, Edgar 1 inch of reach. I remember watching Frankie Edgar. I'm trying to remember which fight it was. I'm trying to remember. I think it was Frankie Edgar versus Gray Maynard. I don't know what year that would have been off the top of my head, but I remember going to this bar, and this is when I was living back in Fargo, North Dakota. Right across the river is Moorhead, Minnesota. I went to this bar in Moorhead that had this little room that they showed the fights, and it was weird, and it was free, I think, too. I don't know. Anyway, it was this little like side room, and they put up a big projector screen, and they just set up like folding tables and folding chairs in there, and there would never be that many people there, and I went by myself because, I mean, I've had some friends who've been into MMA a little bit over the years, but for the most part, MMA has always been kind of a solo thing for me. I go watch fights by myself most of the time. I'm kind of a loser like that. But anyway, I remember watching Frankie Edgar versus, I think it was Gray Maynard. And of course, this was at lightweight, Frankie fights at 135 now, and he's undersized at 135. So it's crazy what he's able to do at lightweight. But I remember watching that fight and having that moment where I was like, Frankie Edgar is the future of this division. I remember being like, this guy is really good. This guy's future like champion material. I don't know. I just wanted to share that because it's interesting when you have that moment with a fighter sometimes where they just have like a breakthrough performance and you realize like, yeah, this guy is something special. And I remember that happening. And it was many, many years ago, of course. And, Frankie Edgar did go on to be very special. I mean, he's definitely, he's a future Hall of Famer. One of the, maybe not the very, very top greatest lightweights of all time, but up there, maybe not in the conversation of like the very, very top, but certainly in somewhere up in that vicinity anyway, enough about that. So obviously the concerns about Frankie Edgar here are just have to do largely with his age. I think that, okay, so Frankie Edgar's last fight was the round 3 knee, not a knee, it was a front kick, round 3 front kick knockout to Chito Vera. And before that, he was finished really, really quickly by Corey Sandhagen. That was a flying knee, right? I think so. I'm getting those two finishes mixed up. But anyway, so he's been knocked out. I always forget I can just look right here on Tapology. KO, TKO, front kick, flying knee. Yeah. So his last 2 fights were knockouts, which becomes concerning when it's an older fighter like that, right? It's easy to start to assume that, okay, is their chin gone? Is it? Maybe, I don't know. I think like to look at the Sandhagen fight, I think that could have happened to anybody. Sandhagen landed a big flying knee flush that could have put anybody out. And as far as the Chito Vera fight, I mean, Frankie Edgar was arguably winning that fight. As it was going, Chito was doing Chito stuff where he starts to take over later in the fight. But if I remember correctly, Edgar won round 1. Round 2 was probably pretty close, and then Chito was starting to take over. But I mean, if that fight would have gone to decision, there's a possibility that Edgar was going to take that decision. And then Chito found that front kick. Is Frankie's chin starting to go? Maybe. It's hard to know, but yeah, it does become a little concerning when he's 41 years old and got knocked out twice in a row like that. But watching that last performance against Chito Vera, I think that it becomes clear that Frankie Edgar's game is still largely there. He's still able to largely do what Frankie Edgar does, which is pretty impressive considering, we're talking about 135 pounds here, 41 years old. Typically, 41 years old at heavyweight or light heavyweight doesn't matter that much because you still got your power, your speed and reaction time doesn't matter as much. Obviously, at the smaller weight classes, you get older, that speed and reaction time starts to drop off, and you're dealing with younger guys who still have that speed and reaction time. It becomes a huge issue. But I think he showed in the Chito Vera fight, he's still largely able to do what he does, which is using a lot of movement. He's constantly moving. He's always using a lot of lateral movement. He's always kind of in and out. Never really gives his opponent a chance to set much up because he's just moving. He's coming in and out with punches, and then he finds his moments to land takedowns. That's pretty much his game right there. Constantly moving, coming in with punches, mixing it up, finding the takedowns when they're there, and then riding out that top control. Excuse me. Sorry, I talked about Frankie a lot. Let's talk about Chris Gutierrez a little bit. His last fight was an impressive KO of Dana Batgari. It was a spinning back fist, follow-up elbows on the ground. And you got to think that Chris Gutierrez is probably riding that high a little bit, right? What he did, he was able to find a big finish over a dangerous guy in his last fight. You got to think that he's probably coming in here. He knows Frankie Edgar is a legend. There's, a lot of times when it's a younger guy, there's got to be a little bit that feeling that like, oh, I'm going in here against a guy I grew up watching. So there's probably a little bit of that. But at the same time, you got to think Gutierrez is probably feeling, I did that to Dana Batgari, I can do that to Frankie Edgar too. He's got to be feeling pretty good here after his last performance. I do think there exists a world in which Frankie Edgar comes out here at 41 years old, does Frankie Edgar stuff, gets takedowns, rides out top control, and wins a decision here. There's a world where that happens. I would not be shocked if Frankie Edgar is able to put together that performance here. But one of the things that Chris Gutierrez is really known for is hard calf kicks. And I think that if he's able to land calf kicks on Frankie Edgar here, he can take away a lot of Edgar's game. Because like I said, Edgar's game is movement, exploding forward with strikes, exploding forward with takedowns. And it's going to be, potentially difficult to get, a lot of those leg kicks with the way Edgar is always using his movement. But if Gutierrez is able to land even a few of those leg kicks, just chop away at him a little bit to slow down his movement, I think he can largely take away Frankie Edgar's game to some degree. So even though an Edgar, a wrestling based decision is certainly not out of the question here, I think it's more likely that we see Gutierrez use those leg kicks, probably stuff Frankie's takedowns and outstrike the smaller, older man to a decision or possibly a late KO. If Frankie's chin is kind of gone and has been affected by those last two, then I think there's a good chance that Gutierrez finds a KO here. But I think we could see it go to decision. So, but yeah, this is another spot that, considering that I do think Frankie Edgar has a path to victory, I don't necessarily love the -210 on Chris Gutierrez. I'm probably going to stay away from this one. But yeah, I've seen a lot of people confident in Gutierrez here, and they might be right. We'll see how it plays out, but I do see a path to victory for Edgar, so I am personally going to stay off it. But as for a pick, I'll pick Gutierrez. All right, 3 fights left, I think, right? Yeah. Next up, we've got Dustin Poirier versus Michael Chandler. Dustin Poirier 28-7, Michael Chandler 23-7. We see Poirier as a -200 favorite. Actually, I think he's up even higher than that now. Oh, he can be had for -180. Okay. Yeah, he's -220. Yeah, he's more like -220 in a lot of spots. Come back on Michael Chandler +186. Let's see. Dustin Poirier 5'9", Michael Chandler 5'8". Not much difference there. Poirier 73-inch reach, Chandler 71.5. So we see a slight advantage on the Poirier side for the height and the reach, but not much to write home about there. Poirier's 33, Chandler's 36. So, both starting to get up. Man, I can't believe Poirier is only 33. I guess, yeah, he came into the UFC pretty young. But yeah, like he's been around so long that I would have believed you if you told me Poirier was more like 37 or something. But anyway, so I'm not gonna say a ton about this fight. My breakdown for this fight is pretty simple. In some ways, I think these guys have sort of similar skill sets, but Michael Chandler is he's a guy who's very, very dangerous early. Another guy like I was talking about earlier, he's dangerous throughout the whole fight, but he's very dangerous and explosive early and becomes a little bit less dangerous and explosive as the fight wears on. And Dustin Poirier, I think, is he's not as, he doesn't have the big explosive knockout power that Michael Chandler has. Poirier is more a guy. So Chandler's a guy who loads up on big single strikes, kind of the same thing I was saying about Andre Petroski. Chandler loads up on big single strikes trying to get you out of there, whereas Dustin Poirier is more of he's a much more technical boxer than is Michael Chandler. He's a guy who puts out volume, mixes up his combos well. We do see Dustin Poirier find finishes, but when he finds a knockout, it's not usually one big shot that puts somebody down. It's that he hurts them. He's got their back on the cage. He flurries, mixing it up to the body, the head, coming with hooks and uppercuts until the ref steps in. That's what a Dustin Poirier knockout looks like more often than not. So here, Michael Chandler will be dangerous early, with his big knockout punches, but Poirier is tough. Poirier is hard to put away. I see Poirier surviving the early onslaught and putting it on Chandler down the stretch. Will he get him out of there? I don't know, but I do like Dustin Poirier here. By the time I finished the tape, he was at -220. But he'd been like -160, -170 just a day or two before that. If I had gotten to the tape on this fight sooner and found Poirier at -160, I probably would have bet him. But, once he got up to that -220 mark, I did not like that nearly as much. So I do like Poirier here, but I'm going to stay away from it. If you like, yeah, never mind. Yeah, I don't have much else to say about this one. It should be a really fun fight, but I'm gonna stay away from betting it. This might be a good spot to keep an eye on for the live line too. Like, let's say Chandler, I don't know that he's gonna put Poirier away, but that doesn't mean he might not land some of those big hammers. Let's say Chandler, lands some big shots on Poirier in round one, maybe even drops him, hurts him. then we could get a better line on Poirier going into round 2. So I might just approach this one that way. Next up, we've got the co-main event of the evening. We've got Carla Esparza versus Weili Zhang at strawweight. Esparza 19-6, Weili Zhang 22-3. Let's see if those odds are correct. So here we show Weili Zhang minus 325, but even up to minus 400 or higher in spots. Carla Esparza can be had for plus 320. So yeah, Carla Esparza is a really big underdog here. Looking at their size, Esparza is only 5'1", Weili Zhang 5'4". They both show a 63-inch reach. So Esparza's the smaller woman here, but that's something that she's accustomed to. At 5'1", she's almost always been smaller. Obviously she fought Rose recently. Rose is, I think, 5'5" or so. So yeah, she's accustomed to being the smaller woman. Obviously, what Carla's known for is her wrestling. I mean, she's known to be the best, most dominant, most stifling wrestler in this division, and one of the better wrestlers, one of the better women wrestlers in the UFC period. I bet Carla at plus 190 against Rose, and she did come through for me here. I have seen some people betting. It shows the odds are backwards here on Tapology. It shows Carla as the favorite. So anyway, that's wrong. But and I have seen some people jumping in on Carla at plus 300 here. And I'm kind of on the fence. Like, I can definitely see that there's some value there. Like, okay, going back here, what was Carla at? Plus 320. Hold on, let me put that in the old implied probability calculator quick. What did I say? Plus 320? I think so. I don't know if y'all use the implied probability. Oh, I already had it pulled up on a different tab. I use the implied probability calculator all the time in my handicapping. So that puts her at 23.8%. Let's round it to 24%. So the question becomes, do you feel that Carla Esparza has a better than 24% chance to win this fight? And man, I think she probably does. But like, I don't know, the way that I do my handicapping, I make my odds without looking at the odds, and then I pull up the real odds and I convert to implied probability. And I try to find an edge of like 5% or better. Let's say if I feel like I've got a 5% implied probability edge or better, I might bet it. It doesn't mean I auto bet it because it's an imperfect system, right? Like when you're saying, I mean, think about, you're saying like, oh, this fighter, I'm going to say this fighter has a 23% chance to win. I mean, what is that based on? It's very imperfect and imprecise. You're just doing your best. So I try to also assume that I'm off a little bit. So, if I find a situation where I have a 10% implied probability edge, like, yeah, I'm probably going to auto bet that. But with 5, I'm going to think about it and try to, see what I've got there. But, so it comes down to what percent chance do you really think Carla has to win this fight? Does she win this fight less than 1 out of 4 times? I don't know. If it were a 3-round fight, I would almost certainly bet Carla at that plus 300 or better. I do think Carla can probably get takedowns here. Here's what's tricky about trying to cap this fight is that Weili Zhang has faced only 5 takedown attempts in the UFC so far, and 2 of them have been successful. And they were both, if I remember correctly, both of the successful takedowns were in the second Rose Namajunas fight. She took her down once. And another thing with takedowns, like when I'm capping, I like to pay attention to the type of takedowns and how they happen, because I think that's important too. The two takedowns that Rose got on Weili Zhang, one of them was like a body lock clinch type takedown that she worked for against the cage, and one of them was like a double leg out in open space. Because sometimes you'll see a fighter who has excellent takedown defense, like especially if they're really strong and physical, it can be really hard to take them down against the cage. Like once you clinch with them and work for a takedown there, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to get it unless you have excellent technique, because they're just really strong, that kind of thing. However, if you perfectly time a double leg against them out in open space, their strength doesn't matter as much. So there's it's always good to pay attention to the types of takedowns and how people are getting them. And that's why I paid attention to that there. And it turned out that there was one that was like the clinch type and one that was like out in open space type. So, but we just haven't seen Weili Zhang face a lot of takedown-minded opponents. We haven't seen her face a lot of takedowns, and Carla is somebody who will come out and potentially push the takedowns. Like I said, I'd bet Carla in a 3-round fight, but in a 5-round fight, like she does, her takedown shots get slower, less explosive. She telegraphs them more. I think her takedowns are easier to defend later in the fight. And looking at the numbers, Carla actually has only 35% takedown. Wait, that was her takedown accuracy. Yeah, I typed this on. Yeah, her takedown accuracy is only 35%. So she misses a lot of her takedown attempts. But even so, yeah, I feel like we just don't really know how good Weili Zhang's takedown defense actually is. Obviously, she's going to be working that hard for this fight. It's going to be probably the best it's ever been. Also, Weili Zhang she has a lot of just like athleticism. I think she's very athletic, and that can make a difference. Somebody who has technique as far as takedown defense, their strength and athleticism can make a difference, especially like I said, if it's the kind of takedowns that are happening against the cage, clinch body lock type takedowns. On the feet with the striking, I think Weili Zhang has a pretty distinct edge there. I think she's quicker. I think she's more technical. I think she's more powerful, just a better striker overall, and probably by a pretty decent margin. I think she's the most powerful athlete, as I said. So yeah, again, like I said, it just comes down to, does Carla have a better than 24% chance to win this fight? I think she probably does. Does that mean I'm going to take a dog shot on her here? I don't know yet. I will for the She's a Dog project. I might as well talk about that a little bit for those of you who don't know. betmma.tips/she's a dog, and it's spelled DAWG. So it's betmma.tips/SHESADAWG. That is where I am tracking. I started back in July tracking. So for that project, I'm putting 1 unit on every underdog in every women's UFC fight, just blindly, no capping, no anything. It's just it's more of a tracking thing than anything else, just a project to see how it turns out. That if you bet, because people are always talking about the variance in women's MMA, right? Like, how can you bet on women's MMA? Because there's too much variance. Well, we're testing that variance here by like, what happens if we just bet a unit on the underdog every time? So I will be putting a unit on her for that, but am I gonna, bet her as part of my actual tracked record? I'm thinking I might. I don't know. The more I think about it, the more I think, yeah, it's hard. It's the 5 rounds that are throwing me off. 3 rounds, I definitely would, because I do think Carla will get takedowns here. I do think she'll get some top control time. I just don't know. Will she be able to do it for 2 rounds? Will she be able to do it for 3 rounds? But how's she going to look? If she's not able to finish Weili on the ground, how's she going to look getting into round 4 and round 5, trying to shoot for takedowns? What's that going to look like? But if she's able to survive all 5, if she wins the first 3 rounds and drops 4 and 5, she'll win a decision. I don't know. It's tough to see how this one's going to play out. But from a money line perspective, if I was going to bet it, I'd be looking at the underdog here, because that's I think there's some value there on that plus 300, plus 310, plus 320 type of range. So I do think I'm going to pick Weili to win, but from a betting perspective, I prefer Carla. And especially if we see this line move anymore, if we see Carla get to even better, I'm definitely going to end up taking a shot on her here. Sorry, I could have muted before I did that. That was rude of me. That brings us to, once again, my throat's given out. We're an hour and 18 minutes in. That brings us to the main event of the evening. For the middleweight title, Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira. Everybody knows the story of this fight, right? Israel Adesanya 23-1, Alex Pereira 6-1. We're seeing Izzy at minus 180. I think that's about right. Yeah, minus 175. He's up minus 200. A lot of spots. Pereira can be had as high as plus 185. They're both 6'4", both have an 80-inch reach. Actually surprises me a little that they're the same height, same reach, same weight, because Pereira definitely looks like Izzy looks like a he's kind of more like the Anderson Silva, John Jones style of body type, right? Like he's very muscular, but he's a little bit thinner and more wiry, right? Whereas Pereira is a little bit more bricked up. Like if looking at them, it looks like if they were the same height and had the same reach, Pereira would be the heavier guy. Well, also he probably is, because if you've looked at Pereira has posted pictures of himself stepping on the scale. I don't remember the specifics, but he does drop and gain back a lot of weight. So yeah, by the time they get in the cage, Pereira will have, probably will have a decent bit of weight on Izzy here. So, everybody knows that these guys fought twice in kickboxing previously. And as I said in my write-up this week in the Never Hedge Substack, the majority of my tape study for this fight consisted of watching Dan Hardy's breakdowns of these two kickboxing bouts. If you don't watch Dan Hardy's breakdowns, they're great. He's on YouTube and on podcast platforms as well, but he did a full breakdown of both of their kickboxing bouts, and I was kind of running out of time to watch tape, and I was like, you know what, instead of trying to watch all their tape and figure it out myself, I'm gonna let Dan Hardy break these down a little bit for me. So but yeah, Pereira did win both of their kickboxing fights, if I remember correctly. He won one by decision and he won one by knockout. But, actually watching those fights does tell you a little bit more. It's not like Pereira was completely dominant in them or anything. Izzy was definitely having his moments, and, even winning. If I remember correctly, the fight where Pereira got the KO, Izzy was looking good in that fight and was potentially winning that fight up until the moment that the KO happened. And so I think that tells us a lot about the dynamic between these two. Pereira is known to have huge power. He's got that massive left hook. If he lands that left hook on you, it's pretty much lights out. He just put Sean Strickland out with that left hook in his last fight. It was the left hook that he used to knock out Izzy in their in their kickboxing fight. One of their kickboxing fights. Israel Adesanya is much more of a finesse kickboxer. He's much more of a he's not really the big one hitter quitter knockout punch kind of guy. He's quicker than Pereira, more elusive than Pereira. Probably, all things considered, higher level skills than Pereira. But Pereira has that massive power, that massive knockout power. Izzy obviously is much more experienced in MMA. The big question in this fight becomes, I think, is Izzy going to use a full MMA game here, right? Excuse me. Not that Pereira has no grappling at all, but he's pretty new to training grappling. And Adesanya, even a few years back, I don't know if he's been doing any lately, but a few years back, he was doing some grappling competitions. He was obviously been the middleweight champion for a while. The guy's all in on mixed martial arts at this point, right? He understands that just being a kickboxer is not going to do the trick. And he was working very hard on his grappling game. And he has a pretty solid grappling game. He doesn't actively look to use it. As far as a path to victory, as far as the easiest path to victory, looking to use his grappling game is probably his easiest path to victory here, right? But so often we see fighters not use their easiest path to victory, and there's reasons to believe that Izzy won't do that here. Part of it being ego, I think. Like he wants to. Obviously, this is a different sport, but I think that he's going to want to show that he's the better striker, because that's still really where his ego lies, right? He knows he's a great MMA fighter, but that's mostly based on his striking. Like, could he decide later in this fight, if things aren't going well, that he's going to shoot a takedown or clinch up and try to trip Pereira to the ground or something? He might do that. I wouldn't be shocked, but yeah, I don't, I don't think it's going to be Adesanya here. I don't think he's going to come out with the singlet on and just shoot takedowns, but you never know. I don't know. So yeah, this is one of those fights that I'm staying away from it. I'm just going to have fun watching it. I don't feel confident. If I was going to bet Pereira, I would bet him by knockout, because I think that the KO finish is the most likely way for Pereira. And Pereira is always dangerous. You know, if he lands that left hook, it could be over. Izzy is obviously he uses his footwork well. He uses head movement. He uses evasiveness. You know, if Izzy uses his speed and his movement here, I think that Izzy, out voluming and outlanding his way to a decision is the most likely outcome. But I don't feel super confident in anything here. I'm going to go with Israel Adesanya as my pick, but I am not going to bet anything on this fight, at least not right now. All right, that is the whole card for UFC 281, y'all. Let's go ahead and take a look at the bets that I've got for this card so far. So if you want to see my bets, you can always look at betmma.tips/erikblock. That's ERIKBLOCK. My bets are always free. I'm not recommending you tail me. I haven't been doing that great lately, but here's what I've got so far. I've got Daniel Hooker at -152 to win 1 unit. I've got Renato Moicano at -120 to win 1 unit. Oh, I did bet Gomez-Juarez. Okay, I didn't remember that I did that. I've got Gomez-Juarez at -105 to win 1 unit. I also bet the under 2.5 in Frevola Azaitar. Like I said, I think it's likely that Azaitar finds that round 1 KO. And if he doesn't, we don't really know much about what Azaitar's cardio looks like going later into the fight. But with how hard he swings and how hard he goes for it, I think it's reasonable to expect that he could slow down and Frevola could, either find a knockout or implement the wrestling. I like this fight to go under 2.5. So I bet that at -170 to win 1 unit. Ulberg versus Negumereanu, I bet the over 1.5 at -155. Like I said, there's a possibility that Ulberg could, chin check Negumereanu and show us that, that durability, nobody's durability holds up forever. Could happen, but I see this fight going over 1.5. I did parlay together Aaron Blanchfield and Montel Jackson. And, I always do this with parlays. Like, I'll tell you, like, oh, I don't like these lines and I wouldn't play them. But then, I end up parlaying them anyway. I think we all do that. Well, people who are pro gamblers who are doing this to actually put food on the table probably don't. But people who are gambling for fun like me, there'll be a line where I'm like, I don't think there's any value on that line. I wouldn't bet it, but I'll parlay it. So I'm not saying it's the smartest idea, but hey, I'm here to have fun. So I did it. Poirier versus Chandler. I bet the over 1.5 there, -130. Like I said, I think Chandler is dangerous early. He does find round 1 KOs, but Poirier is tough. I definitely see this fight. If there's a finish, I think it happens later in the fight. Moicano, okay. The reason I did this, like I said, Moicano is really good at finding the back and finding the sub. But rather than betting Moicano by sub, sometimes I dig into the stats a little bit and have a little fun with this. I looked through Moicano's record. All of his, there might have been one that was in round 3. I can't remember, but I think all or 95% of his submission wins have been in round 1 or round 2. So instead of betting the sub prop, I sprinkled a tiny bit on round 1 at +1100, round 1 sub, and a tiny bit on round 2 sub at +1500. Like I said, I did go with the prop in the McCann Blanchfield. McCann by KO was +650, which I thought was a pretty good number. Like I said, obviously I can only win one of these because I've got Blanchfield in a parlay up here, but I just thought that was a +650 for her to win by KO is kind of a nice number because Blanchfield is pretty hittable. McCann hits pretty hard. If they spend some time on the feet, I could see McCann, and probably it would be something like what the Hannah Goldie fight looked like. Not necessarily that she's going to land one strike that face plants her or something, but that she could land a strike, get her against the cage, start flurrying, and either Blanchfield eventually drops to her knees or the ref comes in for a stoppage or whatever. And then I did also sprinkle 0.1 unit on Azaitar by TKO round 1 at +350. So I've got a bunch of little props going here. So yeah, that is my betting slate for UFC 281. That's all I got for you, folks. I hope you enjoyed that. We went about an hour and a half. My throat is starting to hurt a little bit. I had a good time breaking those fights down. I hope you all had a good time watching and or listening. As always, I am Erik with Erik Bets Fights, reminding you to play it smart, play it tight, even though I don't always do those things. But let's grow those bankrolls, gang. I hope you enjoy the fights this weekend at UFC 281, and I will see you right back here again soon. Have a great one, everybody. Take care.